Hi, I am Amanda, but I prefer to be called Mandy. If I'm called Amanda, I know I'm in trouble. I'm Lincolnshire born and bred, so a yellow belly. I first contracted COVID in February 2021 and went on to be diagnosed in September, well, sort of March, April time. Afterwards, they thought I had continuing problems, which they put down to long COVID. And I actually ended up being off work with long COVID from September 21 until February this year. So my period of ill health, which impacted on my work, was actually long COVID rather than the COVID. And my experience was long COVID was more traumatic for me. Um, I think personally, I was initially so pleased to be sort of back to 70% after COVID, and then it was quite insipid. It was over a period of time the symptoms started adding. There was like layers, and also whereas normally you might have that convalescence period, and you think, well, I'm not quite 100%. That wasn't happening. I wasn't getting that recovery. And I think the sustained physical impacts is what actually then escalated the emotional and psychological impacts. So I found it was, again, it was very much the layering of the symptoms which was so difficult. And I think the biggest thing that stood out with me is at that time there was so little known. So we knew that the medical professions didn't have the experience to pull upon, but also there was that element of hysteria in the entire country. And I've had health issues previously, but this was the only time I could actually say I was in fear. And it was that thought of being fearful of what is my life going to be like? Am I going to get worse? Am I actually going to recover? I don't think, and I hope in a way, because I think it's beneficial, that will never leave me. The first thing that comes to mind was the fatigue. And you say the word fatigue rather than tiredness, but actually there's been nothing like it. It was never ending. It didn't seem to respond to how much strength sleep you had, how much you tried to rest, tried to pace. There was an awful lot of information out about pacing. But it just seemed, and this is my experience, it just seemed that my previous strategies didn't work. So my own personal toolkit was out the window, but also while some of the advice that I did get from professionals helped, they didn't help quick enough for me. And the fatigue was just enduring. It seemed to be relentless. And then alongside with the fatigue was the breathlessness, which as an asthmatic I'm used to, but it was a different type of breathlessness. So again, that is quite fearful. I think the biggest thing, and actually even just thinking about it now, still I can feel the emotions welling up, is I didn't recognise me. I didn't recognise me at all. This wasn't the person I'd been for 50 plus years. This isn't the person that I'd built my life on. And not only did I not recognise me, I didn't like me. I didn't like this me at all. And I think then, you know, that recognition, you didn't know where to go with that, because that was a complete new emotion to me. And as I say, I still find it quite painful to think about that. But I think, yes, I've moved on an awful long way since that. And it can feel very isolating as well when you feel like that. And I think especially with long COVID, for a lot of people, if you just look at somebody, they don't look too unwell. Um, and that's the same as in the mirror. I would look in the morning in the mirror and thinking, today is going to be a good day. I am determined it's going to be a good day. And my body just wasn't listening to me. And that sense of frustration was actually emotionally incredibly draining. I've had a good thought about this, thought about this quite a bit actually, and I've spoken to family members. because I do live with my husband and a grown-up son. And I think whilst they tried to be very supportive, they was equally at a loss of what was happening as I was. How could I expect them to understand when I couldn't understand? I'm aware probably more now after the fact when we can talk, when things are now getting a little bit more to normal and I'm managing my symptoms more. We've been able to have discussions, and again, it was that worry about how would I get back to being me? The practical side, would I get back to working? What was going to be the impact on the family? And I know also as well that they felt very helpless to what do they do to help me? With regarding to friends and work colleagues, I felt that they kind of was sort of two camps. And this didn't go by my expectations. There were some people who withdrew, and I don't think that was deliberate. I felt that they just didn't know how to manage this, that Monday wasn't the Monday. Yet others really did show their generosity, compassion and their understanding. So I think some good friendships have really been strengthened. And maybe as well, you know, I have taken it upon myself already as well to sort of try to inform people about long COVID. And I think that's going to be an ongoing sort of campaign of mine. I think at the very start, there was quite a void of information. The information seemed to be very driven by the media. And it seemed to be very sensationalized. We know it was a pandemic and it was unprecedented times. But obviously the information that got the headlines is probably not the most accurate. So I think a more joined up way of thinking of actually, even if we haven't got much information, having that lines of communication would have been, because it can feel very isolating, and I think that sense of isolation has been sort of overriding throughout long COVID. I think there's been a couple of things. I think actually support of other people, that's through the long COVID, through listening to people with the co-production, through accessing other forums and listening, and it feels like there's been sort of a long COVID family, and we've got various branches of it. And I think as well that's enabled, not only was that supportive, but that's enabled me to recognise my own strengths and resilience. And I think at times of doubt, especially sort of in the middle of the night, there's somebody that you can actually just talk to, just to reassurance, no expectation of any solutions, just somebody to speak to that you don't feel it's just you alone. I think on a practical side, what delayed the recovery was the delay in the services, but I understand that services were overwhelmed, that actually these services previously didn't exist. So it was a monumentum. You know, it's probably the biggest since the history of actually the NHS being devised. But I think the conflicting information that was out there had to be very mindful of what information you got. I went through a stage where I was quite insatiable in the information I was trying to find. I was researching everything, looking everything up, and just trying to get that knowledge. Another thing that I really felt was not helpful was dismissal by the media, that, you know, that sort of long haulers, sort of this perception of, oh, well, you know, they're not really that poorly. It was a cold. And also the dismissal of other people that sometimes, oh, well, you're functioning now, so everything must all be better. So I'm hoping that, and this is going to be lasting, I'm really hoping in years and decades to come that not only are people more understanding with long COVID, but it will enlighten people about other people who've got chronic conditions. I think, as I say, the wait to get onto the long COVID programme. I will say the long COVID programme was amazing. I don't think I'd be back at work without it. It was such an holistic approach, which was so refreshing, with the added bonus that we got to know other people and we got to share our stories. But the facilitator, Lindsay, was just so positive, but open and honest. And it also, for me, it felt as though I had something to do. I could take back some control where I felt I'd lost control. I'm a kind of person who likes to be given homework as such to do, and that really helped. And she was also able to tell us about people who have sort of progressed further on. So again, it gave us that sense of actually people do know what they're doing, they know what support, and that made such a difference. And not directly with long COVID, but some of the things I've learned, I'm using in my day-to-day work. So, you know, that's going to be so lasting. I hope it's improved me as a better person, actually. I think first and foremost is, and it sounds a little bit trite, but it really isn't, it's so important, is to be kind to yourself. To have patience in yourself, because I think sometimes, you know, you've got to recognise that maybe your past strategies just won't work with this. So be open to having a look to see what else will work. Don't have too great expectations of yourself. Certainly don't allow other people to have too great expectations of yourself. And don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to ask for questions. Don't think it's only you, because it really isn't. I would say don't panic, because I think at times you can get into a panic mode. That might be in the early hours of the morning, but please try not to panic. Have faith in yourself. Have more understanding and forgiveness of yourself. Don't expect a quick fix. Things are going to take time. And hope, have that hope that, you know, things will get better, because I think without hope, you can't have optimism, and then you can't have actions. So I think my worst thing is that I was too impatient with myself. That wasn't something that was imposed by other people. That was completely self-imposed. And at times, actually, I used a lot of valuable energy on that, when actually maybe that could have gone on recovery. So again, that's something that I think will be a lasting lesson. Oh gosh, that's quite difficult. I think recognising that hope is such a fundamental human need, and actually look at ways and places where we can get hope. And even in the darkest times, you may not feel that there's hope there, but there's potential for hope. So maybe thinking, I'm hoping that there will be more hope. So that would probably be my message. Is I have vastly underestimated, and I think I continue to underestimate, the impact of long COVID. I would feel that I've recovered remarkably well. My day-to-day life is functioning very well. There is still every day little bits that remind me that, you know, my body checks in and says, wait a minute, you've still got long COVID. So I think it's about continuing to listen to your body. And again, not to panic with that. And I think the other message would be to recognise it does take time, and it's a continuing thing. But actually, I feel quite, I feel as though I'm a member of quite an elite club, and I'm quite privileged to be that. And I think I hold on to the hope and the belief that this is going to have a long-term positive impact on my life.